Good morning, my dears. I'm Evelyn Carter. I'm 78 years old, and I have kept this story folded inside my heart for nearly 50 years. If you are here with me now, please press like, subscribe to Grandma's Diary, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Hearing that keeps me going. It was the spring of 1969. The country outside our small Virginia town felt noisy and restless. Images of distant protests and the war were on the radio, but our street stayed the way it had always been. Maples lining the curb, a mailman who whistled, and neighbors who waved in the evenings. Robert wore his neat suits, carried a briefcase, and worked as the town bank's accountant. He was a man people trusted. I was 30, the mother of two, Daniel, 8, who had a serious bent for books, and Anna, 6, whose paper drawings lay scattered across our kitchen table like confetti. I took care of the home the way I'd been taught to: breakfasts, clean sheets, mending hems, and always a warm bread cooling on the counter. Mornings felt like prayer. The sunlight on the table, the clink of the teacup, the small safe rhythm of a life that made sense. People called me the perfect wife. I believed it, and I was proud of it because I thought the life we built was honest in every inch. On a Tuesday afternoon, raining soft and steady, I tittied the bookshelf in the study. Robert was at the bank. The children were at school. I found a slim, folded note tucked behind an old Bible my mother had given me years before. My hands trembled when I opened it. The handwriting was hurried, not his, and the words hit my chest like a hammer. If she discovers the truth, kill her. 7 words. They made the world stop turning for a long, thin second. For the next moments, all the small sounds, the clock, the drip from the gutter, a neighbor's radio, fell away into a silence that seemed full of questions. I did not know then what the truth meant. I only knew that a promise of harm was hidden among our pages of scripture. My first instinct was to laugh at the absurdity. My second was to press the paper to my face and breathe, as if I could inhale scents from the ink. When Robert returned that evening, he smelled of rain and the bank's polish. He kissed the children, and I watched him with the note under my tongue. A hot thing I could not speak. The house kept its calm that night, but inside me something had been altered, like glass that had been struck by pebble and now carried a thin, invisible crack.
For a week I walked along the edge of the truth without stepping fully into it. I watched Robert's hands as he set the table. They were the hands that balanced ledgers and counted change. I touched his sleeve and measured him against the man I'd married. At church, I found myself listening to the pastor but hearing only the hollow clink of that phrase. The note sat in my sewing basket wrapped in tissue paper, a tiny bomb in my domestic life. I tried to make sense of motive. Who would write such a thing? Was it a cruel joke, a warning from someone who hated me, or more terrible, to imagine a secret between two people in my own home? Fear made my nights thin and long. I began to watch for small signs: a different perfume on his collar, the rumple of a cuff where it shouldn't be, a letter left tucked in an odd place. I watched the banks, hours come and go on the calendar, and learned the exact shape of Robert's excuses. He was often late once in a while, and there were nights he said he had to work late. I believed him because it fit the world I'd always trusted. One afternoon, while Daniel and Anna were at a neighbor's house, I emptied an old trunk in the attic. I told myself I was looking for a photograph, perhaps proof that life had been simpler once. Instead, I found a packet of airline tickets and a hotel receipt from Norfolk, dates that did not match any trips he had told me about. Underneath those, a folded napkin whose edges had the faint scent of cologne that was not his. My hands shook as if the house had taken a new, uncertain breath with me. The more pieces I found, the harder it became to pretend there was nothing. The thread of trust that had run through our years began to fray. When I sat down to stitch a hem that night, the thread seemed to refuse the needle. My mind replayed the note: if she discovers the truth, kill her? The words became not just a thread but a riddle. What truth could be so dangerous? I thought of our children and Imagine the cruel alternative. Futures that might come if the secret were waved into the open. For them, I resolved to gather facts quietly, to hold a shield of calm while my heart mapped its damage. I began to move like a woman learning the hardness she had never known. Where once my days were planned around meals and sewing, they grew filled with quiet investigations. The grocery clerk's small talk became a way to note the bank's gossip. I learned to watch the paper for name mentions and to listen when neighbors hinted about visitors. I kept my face soft in public, because appearances were the armor that kept questions from becoming explosions. At night, I wrote lists, dates, places, odd phrases. I slept little, and when I did, my dreams were a dim theater where fragments of evidence played on a loop. One evening in July, a sound came at the kitchen window. A car door thump and someone's footsteps across the wet pavement. I peered through the curtain and saw Robert talking low with a woman I did not recognize. Her coat was too bright for our muted street. She laughed too easily. My hands clenched the curtain as if to tear it, but I did not move. I watched them part her kiss, their whispered exchange. My throat went dry. When Robert came inside later, he tracked a smell of a tobacco I didn't know and hummed a tune someone else might have taught him. He did not know I had seen the corner of his world crease away. I did something I never thought I would. I saved every receipt I could find, every scrap that might point to patterns. I sat with the children and read them stories, hiding the new defenses. I was building like an old woman tucking cash into a hidden hem. The days grew heavy, and yet there was a new clarity in me. The way light cuts across a table and suddenly shows the dust you didn't see before. I started to imagine a future where I did not crumble when the truth came, where we navigated consequences with dignity rather than panic. That imagining gave me small, stubborn courage. When the time came to speak, it was not dramatic. There was no grand confrontation with voices raised. Instead, in the quiet that had become my companion, I set a place at the table and waited to see which version of Robert would sit down. The night I chose to speak was heavy with summer air. The cicadas sang outside, and the smell of cut grass drifted through the open window. I placed the note on the table, unfolded, and waited. Robert came in, loosened his tie, and smiled the way a man does when he believes his world is safe. "Robert," I said, my voice calm but strange to my own ears. "I found something." He looked at the paper, then at me. For a moment, the air stopped moving. "Where did you get that?" he asked, voice low. "It was inside the Bible," I said. "If she discovers the truth, kill her." The silence that followed was like a church after a funeral, too still, too full of ghosts. He didn't deny it. He simply sat down, shoulders collapsing as if the weight of 10 years had landed on him. "I never meant for you to see that," he whispered. "It wasn't meant for you." "For who, then?" I asked. He rubbed his temples. "It's not what you think. There were accounts. Money moved through the bank that shouldn't have. Someone threatened me. They said if anyone found out, my family would be in danger. So it's about money? It's about survival." I stared at him. The man I thought I knew had become a stranger sitting across from me. There were still the same kind eyes, but now I saw behind them a depth of fear and secrecy I had never imagined. That night, I realized truth doesn't always arrive with explosions. Sometimes, it slips in quietly, sits beside you, and waits for you to notice how cold the room has become. I folded the note back and said nothing more. Outside, the crickets sang on, indifferent to the world that had just cracked open in our dining room. After that night, something inside both of us changed. We lived like people who share a wound but pretend it's healed. Robert went to work every day, but I noticed he checked the locks twice before leaving. At church, he prayed longer. His hair began to gray faster. And I, in turn, began to understand fear not as panic but as a quiet companion. He never spoke of the note again. I kept it hidden under the lining of my jewelry box, along with a photograph of us from the early days when our smiles had no secrets. Weeks passed. Then one afternoon, a man came to the door. His suit was dark, his voice polite but firm. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "your husband asked me to deliver this envelope." He said if anything ever happened to him, you should open it. Robert wasn't home. My hands shook as I took it. I waited until night, until the children were asleep, and then opened it under the lamplight. Inside were 3 items: a key, a letter, and a small black and white photograph of a man I'd never seen before. The letter was written in Robert's hand. If you're reading this, I may already be gone. The man in the photograph is Thomas Hale. He runs money through the bank under false names. I found out, and he warned me. The note you discovered wasn't for you, it was his threat to me. If I disappear, or worse, know that I did everything to protect you and the children. Go to the old storage building near the river. The key will open locker 12. I pressed the letter to my chest and felt the same trembling as that first day. The danger wasn't gone, it had just shifted shape. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed every moment of the past 10 years, every smile, every touch, every quiet dinner. Was it all a lie? I remembered the drawer in Anthony's office that he always kept locked. He said it contained bank records. Nothing for a lady to worry about, he used to say with a chuckle. But now, the drawer haunted me. The next morning, I waited until Anthony left for work. My hands trembled as I picked up his office keys from the nightstand. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears as I entered his office. The drawer opened easily with the second key. Inside, I found a neat stack of documents, all bound with ribbons. At first glance, they seemed like normal bank ledgers. But as I looked closer, I noticed something strange. The numbers didn't add up. There were names I didn't recognize and transactions that seemed off. Then I saw an envelope. It was addressed to someone named Charles Whitmore. The handwriting was Anthony's. I unfolded the letter slowly, my eyes scanning each word until one line made my knees weak. Everything is ready. Once she finds out, we'll handle it the way we discussed. I sank into the chair, tears streaming down my face. Handle it? What did that mean? Kill me, silence me. My husband, the man I loved, was planning something unspeakable. For the next few days, I tried to act normal. But inside, fear was eating me alive. Every time Anthony smiled, I wondered what secrets hid behind it. One afternoon, while organizing the photo albums for the church fair, I found a photograph that made my blood run cold. It was taken at the annual bank party, Anthony, smiling, arm around a man I had never seen before. On the back, written faintly in pencil, "Me and Charles, 1968. The same Charles Whitmore from the letter. The man in the picture had sharp features, a confident smile, and eyes that felt almost predatory. Something about him screamed danger. That night, I pretended to be asleep as Anthony entered the room. He took something from his briefcase, a folded piece of paper, and quietly burned it in the ashtray. The smell of smoke mixed with my rising panic. I wanted to scream, but I stayed still, my heart pounding like thunder. The next day, I decided to follow him. It was risky, but I needed the truth. He left the house at noon, saying he was heading to the bank for an audit. I waited a few minutes, then took my coat and walked the same way. The streets were quiet, the autumn air heavy with suspense. From across the street, I saw him stop at a small cafe near the edge of town. A man was already waiting there, Charles. They shook hands, then sat close, talking in hushed tones. I couldn't hear their words, but I saw Anthony hand over a small envelope. Charles counted something inside, then nodded. Suddenly, Charles's eyes shifted, straight at me. I froze. Did he see me? My breath caught in my throat. I ducked behind a parked car, heart racing. After a few moments, they left in opposite directions. That night, Anthony came home later than usual. He kissed me on the forehead, smiling like nothing was wrong. But I could see it now, that wasn't the face of a loving husband. That was the face of a man hiding something dark. A week later, the whispers in town began. People said there was a problem at the bank. Missing funds. Suspicious withdrawals. And Anthony, he brushed it off, saying it's just an accounting error. But I had seen the ledgers. I knew the truth. One morning, while he was shaving, I asked casually, "Anthony, people are talking about the bank. Is everything okay?" He paused for a second, just long enough for me to notice, then smiled. "Of course, darling. Don't believe gossip." Later that day, a man from the sheriff's office came by asking if Anthony was home. My hands trembled as I told him no. The officer nodded slowly, leaving me a card. "Just tell him we'd like to talk." That night, Anthony didn't come home at all. His car was gone, his clothes missing from the closet. On his desk, only a single Bible remained, the same one that had started everything. I opened the Bible again, the pages now smudged with tears. Inside, I found one last thing I hadn't noticed before, a hidden compartment. In the back cover, inside it was a small photograph. Me, Anthony, and the kids. And behind us, barely visible, Charles Whitmore, standing in the distance, watching. I finally understood. Anthony had been working with Charles in a money laundering scheme. And when he realized I had found out, he planned to make me disappear, just like the missing funds. But fate intervened. A week later, Charles was found dead near the river. The police called it an accident, but I knew better. Anthony never returned. Some say he fled the country. Others believe he met the same fate as Charles. As for me, I raised my children alone, built a quiet life, and carried the weight of that secret for 50 long years. And now, as I sit here sharing it with you all, I finally feel free. It was 2 weeks after Anthony disappeared when Sheriff Douglas came knocking again. He was a tall, quiet man with kind eyes, the sort that looked straight through lies without judgment. "Mrs. Miller," he said softly, removing his hat, "we found something you might want to see." He placed a brown envelope on my kitchen table. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a damp letter, recovered from a suitcase found by the riverbank. The handwriting was Anthony's. "If anything happens to me, it's because I couldn't silence her. Tell the children I'm sorry." I stared at those words until they blurred. The sheriff spoke gently. "We can't be sure what happened, ma'am, but it seems he got mixed up with the wrong people. Maybe Charles wasn't the only one." I nodded, unable to speak. When he left, I sat alone at that same table for hours, listening to the sound of the clock ticking, a reminder that life goes on, even when your world collapses. That day, I promised myself I would protect my children from ever knowing the full truth. Life after Anthony was a test of strength I didn't know I had. I took a part-time job at the library, cataloging old books and helping children find stories that made them smile. Michael grew into a thoughtful young man, always curious, always protective. Teresa became an art teacher, her drawings still filled with the same colors that once brightened our little home. There were nights I cried silently after they fell asleep, wondering if I had done the right thing keeping the truth from them. But what would I have said? "Your father was a thief. He wanted to kill your mother." No, I chose peace over pain. I told them their father had gone away on business and never came back. They grew up believing he was a good man, and maybe that was enough. Sometimes love isn't about the truth. It's about protecting what's left of innocence. Years passed. Seasons changed. I learned to live with the ache, like an old scar that stops bleeding but never stops reminding. Then, almost 50 years later, on a quiet morning much like this one, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the name made my heart skip. Charles Whitmore Jr. He wrote that he was the son of the man found dead in 1970, and that he had been searching for answers his whole life. My father used to speak about a woman named Margaret, said she was the reason everything went wrong. The letter read, "If you are that woman, please meet me. I just want to know the truth." I sat frozen, the letter trembling in my hand. Should I meet him? Or should I let the past stay buried? That night, I prayed, not for courage, but for clarity. And when I woke up, I knew what I had to do. The next afternoon, I took the same road that led out of town, the same one Anthony had taken all those years ago. The cafe hadn't changed much since 1969, the same wooden booths, the same bell above the door. When I walked in, a man in his late 40s stood up. His eyes, so much like his father's, met mine. "Mrs. Miller?" he asked softly. "Yes," I said. "You must be Charles." We sat for hours. He told me how his father's death had ruined their family, how he grew up with questions no one could answer. I listened, and then, slowly, I told him everything. The Bible, the note, the lies, the fear. When I finished, his eyes glistened. "So my father wasn't innocent," he whispered. "And yours wasn't the only life he destroyed." I reached across the table and took his hand. "We were all victims of secrets, Charles. Our parents made choices that we're still paying for. But maybe, by sharing this, we can finally set their souls free." For the first time in 50 years, I felt the weight lift. It's been 3 years since that meeting. Charles and I still write letters every Christmas, not as strangers bound by tragedy, but as to people who found peace in the truth. Michael and Teresa eventually learned what really happened. They didn't judge me. They hugged me, crying, and said, "Mom, you did what you had to do." And maybe that's what life really is. A series of impossible choices made with the best intentions. Now, as I sit by my window, watching the sunset behind the same trees that once framed our old home, I realize that forgiveness doesn't always come from others. Sometimes it comes from within. So, my dears, if you've listened this far, thank you. Remember this: sometimes the truth can destroy, but silence can save. And if love ever leads you down a dark road, trust your soul to guide you back to light. Good night, my sweet ones. This was Margaret Miller, signing off from Grandma's Diary. It was a gray autumn afternoon when I heard the knock on my door. The kind of soft, hesitant knock that carries both fear and hope. I shuffled slowly to the door, my old knees aching a little more than usual. When I opened it, a young woman stood there, no more than 30, with auburn hair and eyes so familiar that my heart skipped. "Mrs. Miller?" she asked gently. "Yes, dear. That's me." She smiled nervously. "My name is Lena Whitmore. I'm Charles's daughter." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Her face, those same sharp features softened by kindness, brought a rush of memories. Charles Jr. had told me about his family, but I never expected one of them to come find me. "I'm sorry to come unannounced," she said quickly, "but my father passed away last winter. Before he died, he told me you were someone I needed to meet." I felt my throat tighten. "Come in, sweetheart." She stepped into my small living room, looking around at the framed photos on the wall, my children, my grandchildren, all the little lives that grew from the ashes of a painful past. We sat together by the fire, 2 generations connected by a history neither of us had chosen. Lena reached into her bag and pulled out a small box. "My father wanted you to have this," she said. Inside was an old silver locket, slightly tarnished but still shining where the light touched it. When I opened it, I gasped. Inside was a tiny photograph of me and Anthony on our wedding day. "I don't understand," I whispered. Lena smiled faintly. "My father said he found it the day he met you both, before everything went wrong. He said it reminded him that even the darkest people once knew light." Tears welled in my eyes. After so many years, that single photograph had found its way back to me, through the family of the man who once wanted to destroy mine. "I think," Lena said softly, "maybe it's time both our families stop carrying their ghosts." We sat there for a long time, the sound of rain against the windows wrapping the house in a quiet rhythm. When she finally left, I stood at the door watching her walk down the street, the locket warm in my hand. And in that moment, I realized something profound. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It redeems it. That night, as I placed the locket on my bedside table, I whispered, "Anthony, Charles, may you both find peace." Then I turned off the lamp, knowing that my story, the one I'd carried in silence for half a century, had finally come full circle. The days that followed Lena's visit were quiet in a way I hadn't felt for decades. The house seemed lighter. the walls breathing out the heavy secrets that had weighed down my shoulders for so long. For the first time in 50 years, I slept through the night without waking in a cold sweat, haunted by shadows I couldn't name. I took long walks in the garden, watching the children of the neighborhood play, their laughter spilling into the air like sunlight. I realized something important. Life had not stopped for me. When the darkness entered, life had continued, patiently waiting for me to catch up. I sat on the porch one evening, the wind carrying the scent of fallen leaves. Michael and Teresa had grown into kind, compassionate adults. They didn't know all the details of Anthony's disappearance, but they knew enough to understand that sometimes people make mistakes, and sometimes love demands silence. They were thriving, carrying the light I had struggled to protect for them. I looked at the Bible on the table, the same one that had held the note all those years ago. My fingers traced the leather cover. So much pain, so many secrets, but also so much love. I realized that truth, when revealed at the right time, doesn't just destroy, it frees. And then I understood the greatest lesson of all. The past is never truly gone. It lives in memories, in choices, in the people we love. But forgiveness and courage can turn even the darkest chapters into lessons that guide the next generation. That night, I lit a candle for Anthony and Charles, for their mistakes and their humanity. I whispered a prayer, not for revenge, not for sorrow, but for peace, for them, for me, and for everyone caught in the ripple of their actions. As I closed my eyes, I felt a warmth spread through me. It was not the warmth of forgetting, but the warmth of acceptance. Life, I realized, is not about holding on to anger or fear. It's about holding on to hope, hope that even in the worst darkness, light can return. And so, my dears, this is the story I have kept in my heart for nearly 50 years. A story of betrayal, of fear, of courage, and ultimately, of peace. If there's one thing I hope you take away from it, it is this: no matter how heavy the past may be, the future is always waiting for you to open the door. Thank you for listening to my story, for sharing this moment with me. May your hearts remain strong, your courage unwavering, and your love limitless. Good night, my sweet ones. This was Margaret Miller, signing off from Grandma's Diary.